Let me now call on IFPRI Director General Shenggen Fan for closing remarks.
Well, I really enjoyed the presentations. It's very rich, and also discussions from room and from the online audience. I have 5 takeaways, just like what you did. Number 1 is infrastructure, how important infrastructure is to link agriculture to nutrition much strongly. So here infrastructure not only is just the roads, but also electricity and internet, access to internet. I think we have seen transformation by connecting households, rural households, to urban markets, urban, let's say, job markets and so on. So that really transformed the whole agricultural, rural development and the nutrition landscape. So that's number 1. Obviously, we need to continue to invest on that. The second one is research and R&D. I heard that the lower productivity of certain nutritious foods was a challenge. So the very expensive, not affordable, not accessible. So how can we really make sure that we increase our investment in R&D of nutritious food crops, with dairy products, animal source foods, and so on. So here at CGIAR, we have 2 centers that are working on fish and animal products, World Fish and the International Livestock Research Institute. If you look at their budget altogether, probably their budget is less than $100 million. The whole CGIAR budget is probably about $1 billion. So you can see the 10% of the budget is spent on, let's say, animal-sourced foods. That's not acceptable. We need to increase that to maybe 50%. I guess probably the animal-sourced food is 50% of the problem, maybe even more. Now, the third is behavior. Behavior, well, I think you guys mentioned about the demand side of consumption behavior. Yeah, I think that's something we still don't. Well, as economists, we actually learn quite a bit. The demand, why certain households demand more nutritious foods than others, even back 30 or 40 years ago by Howdy Boyce, actually, the demand for nutrition, not just demand for calorie. I think we need to do more on that, the behavior. And I know, the people know that the fish is important, eggs are important, meat are important, but they still do not consume more. Even they are very cheap. Obviously not that they are very expensive. Even they are very cheap. We need to understand the behavior. And related to that, the overweight, obesity, I have not heard much. I think the nutrition here, it's not just undernutrition. I guess it includes both under and overnutrition. So overnutrition is also a problem, is rising problem in Africa, in South Asia. Can we tackle this sort of double burden of the nutrition at the same time? So behavior change is critical. Number 4 is sustainability. Climate resilience, again, was mentioned very briefly. Can we make sure that the food we produce are nutritious, healthy on the one hand, and sustainable, climate resilient on the other? So in the future, when we go somewhere, grocery store with a Safeway or the Whole Foods, we can see the labels on the one hand to look at the nutrition aspects of that food, but also sustainability and the climate as a footprints of that product. And obviously, Lancet has begun to work towards that. More work needs to be done. And here it's also very much relevant to Africa, even South Asia. So climate is changing. Yes, the adaptation is very critical, but I think if you can also bring mitigation into the whole picture, then you will be able to convince many stakeholders, including the one in rich countries, to tackle that on. Finally, it's a $500 billion question. It's a policy. So right now, the OECD, emerging economies, and Africa all together, every year, $500 billion are spent on subsidies. Water, land, output prices. And China accounts for 40% of that. I think that China every year they spend $200 billion, probably even more, on subsidies. How can we reform these subsidies to use that money to support the production or the value chain development of more nutritious, healthy food production, and also sustainability. $200 billion, right, in my own country. If we can help them just to reduce by 10%, that's $20 billion. Probably the IFPRI's investment for the last 40 years will be all come back, maybe even more. So let's work on this. And where Martin is here, so we are organizing a workshop at Tuya Commercial on reforming subsidies in some of the large OECD emerging economies. So let's give applause to the great presenters here. And looking forward to hear you about the results of the third phase, if there is one. Thank you.